The morning sky bled crimson as Cecilia Davis stood at her father's grave, the weight of his final words still ringing in her ears. "You'll amount to nothing, just like your mother." She clutched the deed to their failing ranch in her trembling hands, the paper nearly worn through at the creases from the countless times she'd unfolded it, searching for answers that weren't there. At 22, with nothing but a worthless stretch of drought-stricken land and a mountain of debt, Cecilia wondered if perhaps her father had been right all along. Bandera, Texas, 1876, had never been kind to a woman alone. The town that once held promise now seemed to close in around her, its whispers following her like shadows. The drought had turned the once fertile land barren, and the cattle her father had proudly raised were now little more than skin stretched over bone. 3 months of no rain had drained not just the land, but the hope from Cecilia's heart. "Miss Davis," Sheriff Holloway called out as she made her way down the dusty main street. "Have you reconsidered Mr. Montgomery's offer?" Cecilia lifted her chin, willing her voice not to waver. "I have nothing new to say to Mr. Montgomery, Sheriff. That land belongs to me." "A woman has no business running a ranch," he said, shaking his head. "Your father knew that. It's why he was looking to sell before he passed." "My father was many things, Sheriff, but he wasn't a liar. He left that ranch to me, not to that vulture Montgomery." The sheriff sighed, adjusting his hat. "Montgomery's offering fair market value, more than fair, considering the state of things. You'd be wise to take it before he changes his mind." "There's nothing fair about stealing a person's birthright," Cecilia replied, continuing down the street with her head held high, despite the weight crushing down on her shoulders. The general store's bell jingled as she pushed through the door. Mr. Winters looked up from his ledger, his expression darkening when he saw her. "Miss Davis," he nodded curtly. "I'm afraid I can't extend any more credit." Cecilia swallowed hard. "I'm not here for credit, Mr. Winters. I'm here to pay down what I owe." She placed 3 silver dollars on the counter, nearly all she had left to her name. Winters eyed the coins suspiciously before sweeping them into his palm. "This barely makes a dent, Miss Davis. It's what I can manage today." "Your father left you in quite a predicament," Winters said, making a note in his ledger. "A shame, really. He should have found you a husband before he passed. A woman needs protection in these parts." Cecilia bit her tongue, knowing that arguing would only make matters worse. She'd heard it all before from her father, from the townspeople, from everyone who looked at her and saw nothing but a burden, a problem to be solved. "I'll need some flour and coffee," she said instead, changing the subject. "Just enough to get by this week." Winters grudgingly measured out the smallest amounts he could justify, wrapping them in brown paper packages that seemed to mock her with their meagerness. As she gathered her purchases, the store door swung open, bringing with it a gust of dry, hot air and the sound of spurs jingling against wooden floorboards. Cecilia didn't bother looking up, too focused on counting the few coins she had left, until a deep voice cut through the silence. "Afternoon," the stranger said, his voice carrying the dust of the trail and something else, something that made Cecilia's head lift despite herself. The man who stood in the doorway was tall, his frame filling the entrance in a way that seemed to shrink the room around him. The sun at his back cast his face in shadow, but she could make out the strong line of his jaw beneath several days' worth of stubble. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and the gun at his hip looked well-maintained but not flashy. A working man's weapon, not a showpiece. "Help you?" Winters asked, his tone considerably warmer than it had been moments before. "Need supplies?" the stranger said, stepping fully into the store. "Heading north with a herd, camping by the creek tonight." "You're with the Pritchett outfit?" Winters asked eagerly. "Leading it," the man corrected, finally moving into the light, where Cecilia could see him clearly. His eyes were a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, and there was a quiet confidence in the way he carried himself. Not the swagger of the town's drunks, or the false bravado of men like Montgomery, but something steadier, more certain. Those eyes found hers across the store, and for a moment, Cecilia forgot to breathe. There was something in his gaze that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed walls, past the brave face she showed the world. "Miss?" He nodded politely before turning his attention back to Winters. Cecilia gathered her meager purchases and hurried out, feeling oddly unsettled by the brief encounter. She was nearly to the door when she heard Winters' voice drop to what he likely thought was a whisper. That's Hank Davis's daughter. Poor thing hasn't got the sense God gave a goose. Trying to run that ranch all by herself. Montgomery'll have it soon enough, mark my words." She paused, her hand on the door, waiting for the inevitable agreement, the laughter at her expense that usually followed such comments. Instead, there was a moment of silence, and then the stranger's voice, cool and measured. "Seems to me it takes a special kind of courage to stand alone against the odds." Cecilia didn't wait to hear Winter's response. She pushed through the door and stepped back into the harsh sunlight, her cheeks burning with a mixture of embarrassment and something that felt dangerously like hope. The walk back to her ranch was long and dusty, the Texas sun beating down mercilessly on her shoulders. By the time the weathered fence posts of the Davis ranch came into view, Cecilia's dress was damp with sweat, her throat parched despite the careful rationing of her canteen water. The ranch house stood as it always had, a simple wooden structure weathered by years of sun and wind. Once, it had been a source of pride her grandfather had built it with his own hands, her father had told her. Now, with its sagging porch and peeling paint, it looked as defeated as she felt. As Cecilia approached the house, she noticed something out of place. A horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, was tied to the hitching post outside her home. Her heart leapt to her throat. Montgomery. He must have decided to come pressing his offer in person. She quickened her pace, anger replacing fatigue as she climbed the porch steps. The door was ajar, and she pushed it open, ready to confront the intruder. Instead of Montgomery's portly figure, she found the stranger from the general store standing in her kitchen, examining the empty cupboards with a frown on his face. "What are you doing in my house?" Cecilia demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. The man turned, seemingly unsurprised by her entrance. "Miss Davis," he said, tipping his hat. "I apologize for the intrusion. The door was open, and I called out, but no one answered." "That doesn't explain why you're in my kitchen." "No," he agreed, "it doesn't. My name is Adam Pritchett. I'm moving a herd north to the rail yards and was hoping to negotiate water rights for my cattle. Your creek is one of the few still running in these parts." Cecilia set her purchases down on the table, keeping a wary eye on the man. "Water rights cost money, Mr. Pritchett." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I'm aware. I'm prepared to pay fairly." "Why not just go to Montgomery? I hear he'll own this land soon enough." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. Adam Pritchett's expression hardened slightly. "I prefer to deal with the current owner, not vultures circling overhead." Cecilia studied him, trying to discern his true intentions. Men didn't come to her ranch offering fair deals. They came with ultimatums, with thinly veiled threats, with offers that were really demands in disguise. "What's your price?" she finally asked. $5 a day for water access. I'll have 30 head drinking from your creek for 3 days while we rest the herd." The sum made Cecilia's breath catch. It was more than fair, it was generous. That kind of money would buy her time, perhaps even enough to make a payment on her father's debts. "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Adam raised an eyebrow. "Why what, Miss Davis? Why offer a fair price when you know I'm desperate? When everyone in town has likely told you I'll take whatever scraps are thrown my way?" He considered her for a long moment, those blue eyes seeming to look right through her again. "Because, contrary to popular belief, not everyone in this world is looking to profit from another's misfortune." Cecilia wanted to believe him, but years of disappointment had taught her caution. "The creek's yours for 3 days," she said, "but I want the money up front." Instead of arguing or negotiating, Adam reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. He counted out $15 and placed the coins on her kitchen table. "Thank you for doing business with me, Miss Davis." He tipped his hat and turned to leave. "Mr. Pritchett," Cecilia called after him, unable to help herself. "What did Winters say after you left? About me?" Adam paused at the door, his expression unreadable. "Nothing worth repeating. I'd like to know all the same." He sighed, turning back to face her fully. "He said you were stubborn as a mule and twice as ornery. Said your father spoiled you by teaching you to read and write instead of teaching you your place." Cecilia flinched despite herself. "And what did you say to that?" "I told him I'd never met a problem that couldn't be solved by education and determination." Adam's gaze was steady. "And that, in my experience, people who worry about others knowing their place are usually afraid of losing their own." With that, he was gone, the sound of his spurs fading as he walked down the porch steps. Cecilia stood frozen, staring at the money on the table, enough to buy proper supplies, to repair the worst of the fences, maybe even to save one of the fields if she could get seed in time. For the first time in months, she felt something other than despair. It wasn't quite hope, she didn't dare call it that, but it was something close, a small spark in the darkness that had engulfed her since her father's death. Outside, she heard the sound of Adam Pritchett's horse trotting away. She moved to the window, watching his straight-backed figure disappear down the dusty road toward the creek, where his men would be setting up camp. Tomorrow, she decided, she would ride out to check on them. Just to make sure they weren't damaging her property, she told herself. It had nothing to do with the man who had looked at her and seen something other than a burden, a failure, a worthless girl playing at being a rancher. Nothing at all. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Cecilia saddled her mare, Maple. The $15 from Adam Pritchett sat heavy in her pocket, a weight that felt both reassuring and unsettling. She hadn't spent a cent of it yet, afraid that once it was gone, the brief reprieve it offered would vanish like morning dew under the Texas sun. The ride to the creek took longer than usual. Drought had transformed the familiar landscape, turning once green pastures into stretches of brown, cracked earth. Her father's cattle, her cattle now, were scattered across the northern field, ribs visible beneath dull hides. They needed better grazing, but better grazing required water, and water was the one thing Cecilia couldn't provide. As she approached the creek, the sound of men's voices carried on the still morning air. A thin ribbon of smoke rose from a campfire, and the rich smell of coffee made her stomach growl. She hadn't had proper coffee in weeks, making do with weak brews from twice-used grounds. She spotted the cattle first, a sizable herd of healthy longhorns drinking from the creek. Then she saw the men, a dozen or so cowboys moving among the animals, checking hooves and brands. And there, standing tall among them, was Adam Pritchett, deep in conversation with an older man whose gray-streaked beard reached the middle of his chest. Cecilia reined Maple to a stop, at a respectful distance, not wanting to intrude, but determined to check that the arrangement was being honored. One of the cowboys spotted her and called out, alerting the others to her presence. Adam looked up, shielding his eyes against the morning sun. Recognition crossed his face, and he said something to the older man before walking toward her, his stride purposeful. "Miss Davis," he called as he approached. "Good morning to you." Cecilia nodded in greeting. "Mr. Pritchett, I thought I'd check on how things were progressing." "We're settled in just fine," he said, reaching her side. Up close, in the clear morning light, she could see the lines at the corners of his eyes, laugh lines, her mother would have called them. He wasn't as young as she'd first thought, probably in his early 30s, with the weathered look of a man who'd spent most of his life outdoors. "Your cattle seem healthy," she observed, looking past him to the herd. "Best stock in 3 counties," Adam replied, a note of pride in his voice. "Though they're looking better than they should after the drive we've had. Your creek's a godsend." Cecilia's gaze moved to the water, flowing clear and steady between its banks. It was narrower than it had been in years past, but it was one of the few water sources in the area that hadn't dried up completely. "It's fed by an underground spring," she explained. "My grandfather chose this land because of it. Said water was more valuable than gold in Texas." "Smart man, your grandfather." Adam studied her face for a moment. "Would you care for some coffee? It's fresh, and Cookie makes the best brew this side of the Mississippi." The invitation surprised her. Women weren't usually welcome in trail camps, viewed as either distractions or bad luck. But the smell of that coffee was almost impossible to resist. "I shouldn't impose," she said, even as her mouth watered at the thought. "It's your land," Adam reminded her with a slight smile. "If anything, we're the ones imposing." Before she could respond, the older man with the gray beard approached, carrying a tin mug of steaming coffee. "Miss Davis," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "Name's Jeremiah. The boys call me Cookie on account of my cooking, though some days they ain't so complimentary about it." He held out the mug to her. "Thought you might appreciate a proper cup. Got milk and sugar, too, if that's how you take it." Cecilia accepted the mug, touched by the simple kindness. "Black is fine, thank you." The coffee was indeed excellent, rich and hot, nothing like the weak brew she'd been rationing at home. She took a careful sip and couldn't quite suppress a small sigh of pleasure. "Good, ain't it?" Cookie grinned, his weathered face creasing into a map of wrinkles. "Secret's in the timing. Most folks boil the life out of it." It's wonderful, Cecilia admitted. Best I've had in months. Hard times, huh? Cookie's expression turned sympathetic. Boss told us about your situation. Damn shame what this drought's doing to good folk. Cecilia stiffened slightly, uncomfortable with the idea of being discussed. It's temporary, she said, more firmly than she felt. The rain will come eventually. Sure will, Cookie agreed easily. Always does. Question is whether a body can hold out till then. He glanced at Adam, then back to Cecilia. You got help working this place, Miss Davis? I manage, Cecilia said, the familiar defensiveness creeping into her voice. Adam shot Cookie a warning look, but the older man either didn't notice or chose to ignore it. No offense meant, Cookie said, raising his hands. Just that ranching's hard work for two strong men, let alone a woman, Cecilia finished for him, her voice cooler now. Yes, I'm well aware of what people think. An uncomfortable silence fell. Cookie looked chagrined, and Adam's expression was unreadable. Cookie, Adam finally said, why don't you see if those biscuits are ready? I'm sure Miss Davis has better things to do than listen to us run our mouths. Cookie nodded, tipping his hat to Cecilia. Didn't mean nothing by it, miss. You're welcome to stay for breakfast if you've a mind to. As he walked away, Cecilia handed the empty coffee mug to Adam. I should be getting back. Thank you for the coffee. Cookie means well, Adam said, accepting the mug. He's just not used to women who run their own operations. Few people are, Cecilia replied, gathering Maple's reins. It was never my intention, you know, to run the ranch alone. My father... She trailed off, unsure why she was sharing this with a virtual stranger. Your father expected to live longer, Adam finished for her, his voice gentle. He expected me to marry, Cecilia corrected him. He had it all planned out. I was supposed to wed the son of a neighboring rancher last spring. The alliance would have saved both properties. What happened? Cecilia's lips twisted in a humorless smile. The drought happened. The neighbor's son decided a barren ranch and a stubborn wife weren't worth the trouble. He married a merchant's daughter from San Antonio instead. Adam's expression darkened. Sounds like you had a lucky escape. That's not how my father saw it, Cecilia said, the memory of her father's disappointment still sharp. He said I'd driven the boy away with my headstrong ways, that no man would want a woman who spoke her mind too freely. Your father was wrong about that, Adam said quietly. The certainty in his voice made Cecilia look up, meeting his gaze. There was something in his blue eyes that made her heart beat a little faster, a warmth, an appreciation that had nothing to do with pity. You don't know me, Mr. Pritchett, she said, breaking the moment. You can't possibly know if my father was right or wrong. I know enough, Adam replied. I know you're still here, fighting for your land when most would have given up. I know you negotiated a fair deal with me instead of accepting whatever was offered. And I know that speaking one's mind is only troublesome to those who prefer blind obedience to honest conversation. Cecilia stared at him, caught off guard by his assessment. Before she could formulate a response, one of the cowboys called out to Adam, signaling some issue with the herd. Duty calls, Adam said, stepping back. Thank you for allowing us access to your water, Miss Davis. We'll be respectful of your property. See that you are, Cecilia replied, finding refuge in formality. She gathered herself, sitting straighter in the saddle. Good day, Mr. Pritchett. As she rode away, she could feel his eyes on her back. The encounter had left her unsettled in a way she couldn't quite define. There was something about Adam Pritchett that defied her expectations, that made her wonder if perhaps the world wasn't entirely as her father had described it, a harsh place where a woman alone was doomed to failure. The thought was as dangerous as it was tempting. Back at the ranch house, Cecilia forced herself to focus on practical matters. With Adam's payment, she could afford to repair the worst sections of fencing and perhaps purchase feed for the weakest of her cattle. If she was careful, there might even be enough left to pay down some of her debt at the general store. She was making a list of supplies when the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. Through the window, she spotted two riders approaching. One she recognized as Jeb, Montgomery's foreman, and the other was Montgomery himself, his substantial bulk straining the seams of his expensive suit. Dread settled in her stomach. Montgomery had been pressuring her to sell since the day of her father's funeral, his offers growing progressively less generous as her situation worsened. She considered pretending she wasn't home, but the smoke from her chimney would give her away. Squaring her shoulders, Cecilia went to meet them on the porch, her father's old shotgun leaning against the doorframe within reach. Not that she intended to use it, but Montgomery didn't need to know that. "Miss Davis," Montgomery called, his voice falsely jovial as he dismounted with surprising agility for a man of his size. "A pleasure to see you, as always." "Mr. Montgomery," Cecilia acknowledged coolly. "What brings you out this way?" Montgomery adjusted his expensive hat, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Just being neighborly, checking to see how you're faring with this dreadful drought." "We're managing," Cecilia said, not bothering to invite him inside. "Though I doubt neighborliness is what brought you all this way in the heat." Montgomery's smile tightened. "Direct as always. Very well. I've come to make you another offer on your property. A final offer, as it happens." "I'm not selling," Cecilia said firmly. "Miss Davis," Montgomery sighed, as if speaking to a dim-witted child. "You must see reason. This ranch is falling apart around you. Your cattle are dying. You owe money all over town. It's only a matter of time before the bank forecloses." "The bank has agreed to extend my loan," Cecilia countered, though in truth, the extension was hanging by a thread. "Because I asked them to," Montgomery revealed, his smile turning smug. "I thought it only fair to give you time to come to terms with your situation. But my patience is not infinite." Cecilia felt a chill despite the heat of the day. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I've purchased your father's debts from the bank," Montgomery said, dropping all pretense of friendliness. "And I'm prepared to call them due immediately unless you accept my offer." "You can't do that," Cecilia protested, though she knew perfectly well that he could. $300, Montgomery continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Cash money, more than generous considering the circumstances. You could start a new life somewhere else, perhaps San Antonio. I hear they need seamstresses." The amount was insultingly low, less than a quarter of what the ranch was worth even in its current condition. But, with the debt hanging over her head, with no rain in sight and winter approaching. "I need time to consider," Cecilia said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Montgomery shook his head. "No more time, Miss Davis. I need your answer now." "Why?" Cecilia demanded. "Why is it so urgent? This land has been in my family for 3 generations. What possible use could you have for it that can't wait a few more days?" A flicker of something annoyance? Concern? Crossed Montgomery's face. "Business opportunities wait for no man, Miss Davis. Or woman, as the case may be." Cecilia's eyes narrowed. There was more to this than Montgomery was saying. "The cattle drive," she realized suddenly. "Pritchett's herd. You want access to my creek." Montgomery's expression confirmed her suspicion. "The Pritchett outfit is one of many that will be coming through these parts in the coming months," he said smoothly. "Water rights could be lucrative." "So you're not just trying to steal my land," Cecilia said, anger replacing fear. "You're trying to steal my business as well." "Don't be dramatic," Montgomery scoffed. "I'm offering you a way out of a hopeless situation, a chance to salvage something from this wreck your father left you." Cecilia thought of the $15 in her pocket, of Adam Pritchett's fair deal, of the possibility that she might survive until the rains came if she was careful and clever. "My answer is no," she said firmly. "This land is not for sale, not to you, not to anyone." Montgomery's face hardened. "You're making a grave mistake, Miss Davis." "Perhaps," Cecilia agreed, "but it's my mistake to make. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." "This isn't over," Montgomery warned, his jovial mask slipping completely to reveal the cold calculation beneath. "One way or another, this land will be mine." "Good day, Mr. Montgomery," Cecilia said, refusing to be intimidated despite the fear curling in her stomach. As Montgomery and his foreman rode away, Cecilia allowed herself a moment of doubt. Had she just made a terrible mistake? Montgomery had the power to ruin her, to take everything her family had built. But the alternative, giving up, admitting defeat, confirming every harsh word her father had ever said about her worthlessness, was unthinkable. With renewed determination, Cecilia went to Saddle Maple again. She needed supplies, and more importantly, she needed information. If Montgomery was planning something, the town would be buzzing with it, and perhaps, she admitted to herself, she might learn more about Adam Pritchett and his cattle drive. Knowledge was power, after all, and Cecilia had precious little of either at the moment. The ride into Bandera was tense, Cecilia's mind racing with possibilities and fears. Montgomery wasn't a man to be crossed lightly. His influence extended throughout the county, from the bank to the sheriff's office. If he decided to make good on his threats, Cecilia had few allies to turn to. The town was busier than usual when she arrived, the dusty streets crowded with wagons and riders. It took her a moment to realize why Pritchett's cattle drive had drawn attention. Drovers meant money, and Bandera was eager for both. She tied Maple outside the general store, steeling herself for another unpleasant encounter with Winters. To her surprise, the storekeeper greeted her with a nod that almost approached respect. "Miss Davis," he said as she approached the counter, "what can I do for you today?" Cecilia placed her list on the counter, along with 5 of Adam's dollars. "I'll need these items, Mr. Winters." Winters glanced at the list, then at the money, his eyebrows rising slightly. "Running water for the Pritchett drive, are you?" he asked, an understanding dawning in his eyes. "News travels fast," Cecilia observed. "Small town," Winters shrugged, already gathering her supplies. "Montgomery was in earlier, fit to be tied. Said you refused to sell him your property." "That's right," Cecilia confirmed, watching the storekeeper carefully. "Bold move," Winters commented, measuring out flour into a sack. "Montgomery's not used to hearing no." "Neither am I," Cecilia replied evenly. That earned her a small smile from Winters, surprising her. "Your father was the same way, stubborn as they come." "Is that meant to be a compliment, Mr. Winters?" "Take it how you will," the storekeeper said, continuing to gather her supplies. "But you should know, Montgomery's been buying up water rights all along the cattle trails, charging double what the land's worth, then tripling the fees for the drovers." Understanding dawned on Cecilia. "He's creating a monopoly." "Yep," Winters nodded. "And your creek is the one piece he doesn't control. Without it, drives have to detour 30 miles east to water their herds." "No wonder he was so insistent," Cecilia murmured, more to herself than to Winters. "The Pritchett outfit's the first major drive to come through since the drought really took hold," Winters continued, surprisingly forthcoming. "Word is, there are 3 more drives right behind them. Big money to be made in water rights these days." Cecilia absorbed this information, her mind racing. The $15 from Adam was just the beginning. If more drives were coming through, she could charge fair rates, not Montgomery's extortionate fees, but enough to keep her ranch afloat until conditions improved. "Thank you for telling me this, Mr. Winters," she said, genuinely grateful for the intelligence. Winters looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Don't thank me. I'm just stating facts. Montgomery's got half the town in his pocket, including the sheriff. You'd best watch yourself." As if summoned by the mention, Sheriff Holloway pushed through the door of the general store, his gaze landing immediately on Cecilia. "Miss Davis," he said, his tone deceptively casual. "Just the person I was hoping to see." "Sheriff," Cecilia acknowledged, a sense of foreboding settling over her. "What can I do for you?" "I understand you've entered into a business arrangement with the Pritchett outfit," Holloway said, fingering the brim of his hat. "Water rights, was it?" "That's correct," Cecilia confirmed, wondering how much Montgomery was paying the sheriff to do his dirty work. "Well, now that's a problem," Holloway sighed, as if genuinely regretful. "You see, the county has regulations about commercial use of waterways, permits required and such." "Since when?" Cecilia demanded, not bothering to hide her skepticism. "Since always," Holloway insisted, though his eyes shifted away from hers. "Just haven't had cause to enforce it much before now. But with the drought and all, water management's become a priority." "I see," Cecilia said coldly. "And I suppose Mr. Montgomery has all the necessary permits for his properties?" "Filed them months ago," Holloway nodded. "Very thorough, Mr. Montgomery, always by the book." The lie was so blatant Cecilia almost laughed. "And what happens if I don't have these permits?" "Well," Holloway drawled, "I'd have to ask Mr. Pritchett to move his herd off your land immediately. And there'd be a fine, of course. Substantial one, given the circumstances." "How substantial?" Cecilia asked, though she already knew the answer would be more than she could pay. $50, Holloway stated, watching her face for a reaction. "Due immediately." It was more than 3 times what Adam had paid her. Cecilia felt the walls closing in, Montgomery's strategy becoming clear. If she couldn't pay the fine, the county could place a lien on her property. Another debt she couldn't repay, another excuse to force her to sell. That seems excessive for a regulation I've never heard of, Cecilia said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Take it up with the county commissioners if you like, Holloway shrugged. But until then, I'll need either the fine or proof that the Pritchett outfit has moved on. And if I refuse? Holloway's friendly demeanor slipped, revealing the hard man beneath. Then I'll be forced to arrest you for obstruction, Miss Davis. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The store had gone quiet, other customers watching the exchange with undisguised interest. Cecilia felt her cheeks burn with a mixture of anger and humiliation. I'll have your answer by tomorrow morning, Holloway said, tipping his hat. Good day, Miss Davis. As the sheriff left, Cecilia turned back to Winters, who was finishing wrapping her supplies with unusual care. Is there actually such a regulation? She asked quietly. Winters shook his head slightly. Not that I've ever heard of, but the sheriff's word carries weight, and Montgomery's backing him. Cecilia nodded, gathering her packages. She had expected Montgomery to retaliate, but not so quickly or ruthlessly. She needed to warn Adam, to explain the situation before the sheriff showed up at her creek demanding money or eviction. She was halfway to the door when Winters called after her. Miss Davis? Cecilia turned back, surprised. Your father was a proud man, Winters said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Too proud to admit when he needed help. Don't make the same mistake. The unexpected advice left Cecilia speechless. She nodded once in acknowledgement before stepping back into the harsh sunlight of the street. Her mind was racing as she mounted Maple and turned toward home. Montgomery was determined to drive her off her land one way or another. The sheriff was firmly in his pocket. And now, Adam Pritchett and his herd were caught in the middle of a fight that wasn't theirs. The unfairness of it all made her hands clench around Maple's reins. She had done nothing wrong except refuse to bow to Montgomery's demands, and now she faced ruin because of it. But as she rode, her initial despair gave way to determination. Montgomery might have money and influence, but Cecilia had something he couldn't buy: the truth. And perhaps, just perhaps, she had something else as well. An ally in Adam Pritchett, a man who had already shown himself to be fair-minded and principled. It wasn't much, but it was something to hold on to. And right now, Cecilia needed all the hope she could get. By the time Cecilia reached the creek where Adam's herd was watering, the afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. The camp was a hive of activity, men moving purposefully among the cattle, preparing for the evening and the day ahead. She spotted Adam immediately, his tall figure unmistakable as he gave instructions to a group of cowboys. He noticed her approach and broke away, walking to meet her. Miss Davis, he called, a smile warming his features. Twice in one day, to what do I owe the pleasure? Cecilia dismounted, her expression serious enough to wipe the smile from Adam's face. We need to talk, Mr. Pritchett, she said, glancing around at the busy camp. Privately, if possible. Adam nodded, his brow furrowing with concern. Of course. We can use my tent. He led her through the camp, past curious glances from his men, to a small tent set slightly apart from the others. It was sparsely furnished with a bedroll, a small portable desk covered in maps, and a trunk that presumably held his personal belongings. Not much, but it offers some privacy, Adam said, holding the tent flap open for her. Once inside, Cecilia wasted no time. There's a problem. Montgomery, the man who's been trying to buy my ranch, has the sheriff in his pocket. They're claiming I need special permits to allow commercial use of my creek. Adam's expression darkened. Let me guess, permits that cost more than you can afford. $50, Cecilia confirmed. Due immediately, or the sheriff says he'll force you to move your herd off my land. Adam swore under his breath, pacing the small confines of the tent. Montgomery's behind this, I take it. He came to the ranch this morning, right after I left your camp, Cecilia explained. Made me a final offer to buy my property. When I refused, he threatened to call in my father's debts. Apparently, he's purchased them from the bank. And now he's using the sheriff to apply more pressure, Adam concluded, his jaw tight with anger. It's an old tactic. I've seen it before. I came to warn you, Cecilia said. The sheriff said he'd be checking tomorrow morning. You might want to move your herd before then. Avoid getting caught in the middle of this. Adam stopped pacing, turning to face her with surprise. You came to warn me, not to ask for the $50? The question caught Cecilia off guard. Of course not. she said, slightly offended. This is my fight, not yours. You paid a fair price for water access. I won't ask you to pay more because Montgomery is trying to bully me. Something shifted in Adam's expression, a softening around his eyes. You're an unusual woman, Cecilia Davis. The use of her first name sent an unexpected warmth through her. I'm just trying to do what's right, Mr. Pritchett. Adam, he corrected gently. If we're going to be allies in this, you might as well use my name. Allies? Cecilia repeated, uncertain. Unless you'd prefer to face Montgomery and his pet sheriff alone, Adam said, a challenging note in his voice. No, Cecilia admitted after a moment's hesitation. But I don't see what you can do. The sheriff has the law, or at least the appearance of it, on his side. Adam's smile held a hint of mischief that transformed his serious face. The law is a flexible thing in these parts, especially when there's money involved. I won't bribe the sheriff, Cecilia said firmly, even if I had the money, which I don't. I wasn't suggesting bribery, Adam assured her. I was thinking more along the lines of a different interpretation of the facts. What do you mean? Adam moved to his desk, rifling through the papers there, until he found what he was looking for, a folded document that he handed to Cecilia. My contract with the cattle broker in Kansas City, he explained as she opened it. I'm just a hired hand, Miss Davis. This herd doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the Western Cattle Company. Cecilia scanned the document, beginning to understand his point. So you're saying... I'm saying that I'm not engaged in commercial use of your creek, Adam finished for her. I'm simply a traveler passing through, watering animals that aren't mine, no different from any visitor to your property. Will the sheriff accept that explanation? Cecilia asked, hope beginning to blossom despite her best efforts to suppress it. He might not, Adam conceded, but his superiors in Austin might be very interested to hear about a local sheriff inventing regulations to harass a property owner on behalf of a wealthy land speculator. You'd go to Austin for me? Cecilia asked, surprised by the offer. Not personally, Adam said, but I have friends in the capital who owe me favors. One telegraph would raise questions the sheriff might prefer to avoid. Cecilia studied Adam's face, trying to understand his motivation. Why would you do this? You barely know me. Adam hesitated, seeming to weigh his words carefully. Let's just say, I've seen men like Montgomery before. Men who use their wealth and influence to take what doesn't belong to them. I've never much cared for bullies. There was something in his tone that suggested personal experience, a hint of old anger not quite extinguished. Cecilia wanted to ask, but sensed it wasn't the time. Thank you, she said instead, handing the contract back to him. I don't know if it will work, but I appreciate the effort. We'll find out tomorrow, Adam said, folding the contract and tucking it into his shirt pocket. In the meantime, would you join us for supper? Cookie's making his famous stew, and I hear it's not to be missed. The invitation was casual, but Cecilia sensed it was more than simple hospitality. Adam was making a statement by including her in his camp's evening meal, a public declaration of alliance. I'd be honored, she accepted, her own gesture of solidarity. The camp's reaction to her presence at dinner was mixed. Some of the men seemed uncomfortable with a woman in their midst, while others were openly curious. Cookie, however, was delighted, serving her the first and largest portion of his stew, with a flourish that made her smile despite the tension of the day. As they ate, Adam introduced her to his men, making it clear through his manner that she was to be treated with respect. Cecilia found herself relaxing slightly, drawn into their easy camaraderie and stories of the trail. So, Miss Davis, one of the younger cowboys asked during a lull in the conversation, how'd you end up running a ranch all by yourself? Ain't usual, if you don't mind me saying. Bobby, Adam warned, but Cecilia waved off his concern. It's a fair question, she said. My father died 6 months ago. The ranch was all he had to leave me. No brothers? Another cowboy asked. No siblings at all, Cecilia replied. My mother died when I was young. It was just my father and me for most of my life. Must be hard work, Bobby persisted, running a spread alone. It is, Cecilia acknowledged, but it's my home, worth fighting for. A murmur of approval ran through the group at that sentiment. Ranchers and cowboys might have their differences, but respect for land and home was a value they shared. What about you, Mr. Pritchett? Cecilia asked, partly to deflect attention from herself and partly out of genuine curiosity. How did you come to be a trail boss? Adam considered the question, taking a sip from his coffee mug before answering. Started as a ranch hand in East Texas when I was 16. Worked my way up. Did my first cattle drive to Kansas when I was 20 and found I had a knack for it. Been doing it ever since. Knack, he says. Cookie snorted from his position by the fire. Boy's the best trail boss this side of the Mississippi, and he knows it. Adam's ears reddened slightly at the praise, a reaction Cecilia found unexpectedly endearing. Cookie exaggerates, Adam said. I'm just experienced enough to know that planning prevents problems, and problems on the trail can be deadly. Boss once led us through Apache territory without losing a single head, one of the older cowboys added. And another time, we hit a blizzard in the panhandle that buried half the surrounding ranches. Got every man and beast through alive. Sounds impressive, Cecilia said, watching Adam's increasing discomfort with the laudatory stories. Just doing the job, Adam insisted. And I've had my share of failures too. Just ask Cookie about the time I led us straight into a nest of rattlers. That launched a new round of stories, these focusing on Adam's occasional missteps, though even these tales were told with obvious affection and respect. Cecilia found herself watching Adam more than listening, noticing the way his men looked to him, the easy authority he carried without arrogance. It was well past dark when Adam walked Cecilia back to her horse, the camp settling behind them as men took up their night watch positions or rolled into their bedrolls. Thank you for including me, Cecilia said as they reached Maple. It's been a long time since I enjoyed an evening like that. You're welcome any time, Adam replied. My men like you. They were kind, Cecilia acknowledged, though I suspect that has more to do with your influence than any charm on my part. Don't sell yourself short, Adam said, his voice softening. You held your own with a camp full of rough men who aren't used to female company. That takes a special kind of courage. Or desperation, Cecilia murmured. No, Adam said firmly, stepping closer, his face serious in the moonlight. What I've seen from you isn't desperation. It's determination, strength, the kind that comes from believing in something bigger than yourself. His nearness made it hard for Cecilia to think clearly. She could smell the leather of his vest, the faint trace of coffee on his breath. You make me sound like some kind of heroine from a dime novel, she said, trying to lighten the moment. I'm just trying to keep what's mine. And that, Adam said softly, is what makes you extraordinary. Most people would have given up by now, accepted Montgomery's money and walked away. But not you. My father would say it's just stubbornness, Cecilia said, the old pain creeping into her voice despite her efforts to keep it at bay. Your father was wrong about a lot of things, Adam said, his hand reaching up to gently tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so unexpected that Cecilia forgot to breathe. Including you. For a moment, they stood in silence, the night sounds of the camp and creek surrounding them, the low lowing of cattle, the crackle of the dying fire, the soft call of a night bird in the distance. I should go, Cecilia finally said, though she made no move to mount her horse. It's late, Adam agreed, also not moving away. The trail can be dangerous after dark. Perhaps you should stay. The offer hung between them, fraught with possibilities that made Cecilia's heart race. But despite the temptation, she knew she couldn't accept. Not now, not with so much uncertainty ahead. I know these trails better than anyone, she said, forcing herself to step back. I'll be fine. Adam nodded, accepting her decision without argument. Then I'll see you in the morning, when the sheriff comes. Yes, Cecilia agreed, gathering Maple's reins. Thank you again, Adam, for everything. As she rode back to her ranch through the darkness, Cecilia's mind was a whirl of conflicting emotions. Fear of what tomorrow might bring, warred with a strange new hope. And beneath it all, a warmth she hadn't felt in years, the dangerous, delicious feeling of being seen, truly seen, by someone who believed in her worth. It was a feeling she hardly dared trust, yet couldn't quite ignore. Like the first drops of rain after a long drought, it promised something she had almost forgotten was possible. Renewal. Sheriff Holloway arrived at Cecilia's ranch just after dawn, as promised. She was waiting for him on the porch, dressed in her best skirt and blouse, not out of deference to the sheriff, but as armor against what was to come. "Morning, Miss Davis," Holloway called as he dismounted. "I trust you've had time to consider your situation." "I have," Cecilia confirmed, remaining seated in her father's old rocking chair. "And I've concluded there's been a misunderstanding." Holloway's eyebrows rose. "A misunderstanding?" "Yes," Cecilia said calmly. "You see, there's no commercial use of my water taking place. Mr. Pritchett is simply a traveler passing through with animals that don't belong to him." The sheriff's expression darkened. "Don't play games with me, Miss Davis. Pritchett paid you for water access. That's a commercial transaction." "He compensated me for potential damage his passage might cause," Cecilia corrected. "A common courtesy among neighbors, not a business arrangement." "That's not how Montgomery sees it," Holloway said, dropping all pretense. "And frankly, Miss Davis, his view carries more weight than yours in this county." "Perhaps," a new voice interjected. "But I wonder how the territorial governor might view a sheriff who invents regulations to harass a female property owner on behalf of a wealthy land speculator." Adam Pritchett emerged from around the side of the house, his expression calm but determined. He was dressed more formally than Cecilia had seen him before, in a clean black vest over a white shirt, his gun belt polished and prominent at his hip. "This doesn't concern you, Pritchett," Holloway said, his hand drifting toward his own weapon. "I disagree," Adam replied, not breaking stride as he climbed the porch steps to stand beside Cecilia's chair. "When an officer of the law abuses his power to intimidate a citizen, it concerns every decent person." Holloway's face flushed with anger. "You're calling me corrupt? That's a dangerous accusation, Cowboy." "Not as dangerous as the one I'm prepared to make in my telegram to Austin," Adam countered, pulling a folded paper from his vest pocket. "I have here a sworn statement from Miss Davis detailing the events of the past 2 days. I also have a copy of my contract with the Western Cattle Company, proving that I am merely an employee moving their property across the territory." Cecilia watched the exchange with growing amazement. Adam had clearly been busy after she left last night, preparing for this confrontation. "You think the governor cares about a local water dispute?" Holloway scoffed, though Cecilia noticed a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "I think the governor cares very much about corruption in his territory," Adam replied evenly, "especially when that corruption threatens to disrupt the cattle trade that's bringing prosperity to Texas." This was a new angle, one Cecilia hadn't considered. The cattle drives were indeed vital to the territory's economy, and interference with them would draw attention from the highest levels of government. "You're bluffing," Holloway accused, though with less conviction than before. "Try me," Adam challenged, his voice soft but resolute. "Or you could simply admit there's been a misunderstanding about these supposed regulations. No harm done. Miss Davis continues to allow travelers to water their animals on her property, and everyone goes about their business." The standoff stretched for several tense moments, Holloway's gaze shifting between Adam and Cecilia as he weighed his options. Finally, his shoulders sagged slightly in defeat. "It seems I may have been overzealous in my interpretation of the county statutes," he conceded grudgingly. "No permit is required for travelers passing through private property, so long as the owner consents." "I'm glad we cleared that up," Adam said, his tone neutral, but his eyes triumphant. "Miss Davis and I appreciate your understanding, Sheriff." Holloway shot Adam a venomous look before turning back to Cecilia. "This isn't over, Miss Davis. Montgomery won't take this lying down." "I expect not," Cecilia replied calmly. "But perhaps you might remind Mr. Montgomery that harassment of a property owner is a crime, even in Bandera County." The sheriff muttered something under his breath as he returned to his horse and mounted up. "You've made a powerful enemy today," he warned before riding away, a cloud of dust marking his retreat. As soon as he was out of earshot, Cecilia turned to Adam, her eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude. "That was incredible. How did you know what to say?" Adam's stern expression melted into a grin. "I've dealt with men like Holloway before. They're bullies who fold when confronted with someone who knows the rules better than they do." "And the telegram to the governor?" Cecilia asked. "Was that real?" "It would have been," Adam assured her, "if necessary. I have a friend in Austin who served with me during the war. He has the governor's ear now." "You're a remarkable man, Adam Pritchett," Cecilia said softly. "No more remarkable than you," Adam replied, his gaze holding hers. "Standing your ground against Montgomery and his cronies took real courage." "It's not over," Cecilia sighed, echoing the sheriff's warning. "Montgomery won't give up easily." No, Adam agreed. He won't. But he's been put on notice that you're not alone in this fight. The implication of his words hung in the air between them. Adam would be moving his herd north soon, continuing on to Kansas City. His protection was temporary, a brief reprieve rather than a solution. As if reading her thoughts, Adam spoke again. My men and I will be moving on tomorrow. We've rested the herd enough, and we need to make up time if we're to reach Kansas City by the end of the month. Cecilia nodded, trying to hide the pang of disappointment the news brought. Of course, you've already done more than enough. Actually, Adam said, his expression turning serious again, I have a proposition for you. A proposition? Cecilia repeated, uncertain of his meaning. The Western Cattle Company is looking to establish more permanent water agreements along the trail, Adam explained. Reliable access points where drives can rest and water their herds without conflict or exorbitant fees. Your creek would be perfect. Cecilia's mind raced with the possibilities. What kind of agreement? A long-term contract, Adam said. Guaranteed payments for water access during the drive season, with set rates that are fair to both parties. No Montgomery-style price gouging, but enough to provide you with steady income. That sounds promising, Cecilia said cautiously. But why would they deal with me when Montgomery controls most of the other water in the area? Because Montgomery is a problem for them too, Adam explained. They've been looking for ways to break his stranglehold on the trail. Your ranch could be the first step. Hope, dangerous and fragile, bloomed in Cecilia's chest. This would mean I could keep the ranch, even with the drought. It would mean a reliable source of income, regardless of the drought, Adam confirmed. Enough to pay down your debts and keep Montgomery at bay until conditions improve. And what would this arrangement require from me? Cecilia asked, still wary of an offer that seemed too good to be true. Just what you're already providing access to your creek for cattle drives, maintenance of the water source, and a commitment to fair dealing. Adam hesitated, then added, and perhaps, consideration of another proposition, a more personal one. Cecilia's heart skipped a beat at the intensity in his gaze. What kind of personal proposition? I'll be back this way in 2 months, after delivering this herd to Kansas City, Adam said, his voice dropping to a softer register. I'd like to call on you then, if you're amenable. Properly, I mean. Not as a business associate, but as a suitor. The boldness of the declaration took Cecilia's breath away. You hardly know me, she protested weakly. I know enough, Adam replied, echoing his words from the night before. I know you're brave and principled. I know you love this land enough to fight for it against impossible odds. And I know that from the moment I saw you in that general store, standing tall despite the weight on your shoulders, I haven't been able to get you out of my mind. Cecilia stared at him, speechless. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. No man will want a woman who speaks her mind too freely. You're worthless as a wife, girl. My father, she began hesitantly, was wrong, Adam interrupted gently but firmly. About you, about what makes a woman valuable, about everything. He took her hand in his, the touch sending warmth up her arm and into her chest. I'm not asking for an answer now, he continued, just the chance to return and make my case properly. To show you that there are men in this world who value strength and independence in a woman, who see those qualities as assets rather than flaws. Cecilia looked down at their joined hands, then back up to Adam's face. There was no guile there, no hidden agenda she could detect, just an honest, open expression of interest and admiration that made her feel simultaneously vulnerable and powerful. 2 months, she said finally, her voice steadier than she expected. I'll still be here. Adam's smile was like sunrise breaking over the horizon, warm and full of promise. Then I have something to look forward to on the long ride back from Kansas. He released her hand reluctantly, stepping back. In the meantime, I'll send a telegram today to the Western Cattle Company about the water agreement, with your permission, of course. You have it, Cecilia nodded, still dazed by the turn of events. And thank you, Adam, for everything. Don't thank me yet, Adam warned, though his eyes still held that warm light. Montgomery won't take this lying down. There may be more trouble before I return. I can handle Montgomery, Cecilia said with newfound confidence. Knowing I have allies makes all the difference. Adam nodded, approval evident in his expression. I believe you can, but just in case. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. This is the name and address of my friend in Austin. If things get bad, telegraph him. He'll help." Cecilia accepted the paper, touched by his foresight and concern. "I will." Adam tipped his hat, a gesture that was becoming familiar and dear to Cecilia. "Until I return, then?" "Until then," Cecilia agreed, watching as he descended the porch steps and walked back toward his waiting horse. As Adam rode away, Cecilia remained on the porch, the morning sun warming her face. For the first time in months, perhaps years, she felt something like hope taking root inside her. Not just hope for the ranch's survival, but for something more personal, more profound. The road ahead would not be easy. Montgomery would not give up his plans easily, and the drought might yet worsen before it broke. But Cecilia was no longer facing these challenges alone, no longer carrying the weight of her father's disdain as her only inheritance. Adam Pritchett had seen something in her that her father never had: strength instead of stubbornness, determination instead of defiance. And in seeing her truly, he had given Cecilia the greatest gift possible, the beginning of belief in her own worth. She turned and went back into the house, already making plans for the coming months. There was much to do before Adam returned, and Cecilia Davis was not a woman to waste precious time. The 2 months following Adam's departure were some of the most challenging and transformative of Cecilia's life. True to his word, Adam had sent a telegram to the Western Cattle Company before leaving Bandera, and within a week, Cecilia had received a formal contract offering terms more generous than she had dared hope for. The agreement guaranteed payments for water access during the drive season, providing Cecilia with enough income to begin paying down her father's debts. More importantly, it gave her legitimacy in the eyes of the town. She was now a businesswoman with a valuable asset, not just a stubborn girl clinging to a worthless piece of land. Montgomery, as predicted, did not take the development well. His initial reaction was to increase his pressure, sending his men to ride the boundaries of her property day and night, intimidating her with their presence. When that failed to drive her away, he attempted to undermine her new contract, spreading rumors in town about the unreliability of her water supply. But Cecilia had learned from Adam's example. She documented every incident of harassment, sent regular reports to Adam's friend in Austin, and made it clear to everyone in Bandera that she was not to be trifled with. Slowly, grudgingly, the tide of public opinion began to shift in her favor. The general store extended her credit again. The blacksmith agreed to repair her plow without demanding payment up front. Even Sheriff Holloway, while not exactly friendly, had begun to treat her with a wary respect. It wasn't just Adam's influence that had caused this change, though his support had been crucial. It was Cecilia herself, standing taller, speaking more confidently, refusing to be diminished by the whispers and doubts that had once seemed so overwhelming. On the day marking exactly 2 months since Adam's departure, Cecilia rose before dawn, a flutter of anticipation in her stomach. There was no guarantee he would arrive today. Specifically, trail drives were unpredictable, subject to weather and 1,000 other variables. But the possibility was enough to make her hands tremble slightly as she dressed in her best blue dress, the one her mother had made for her 18th birthday. The drought had finally broken the week before, a 3-day rain that had transformed the parched landscape. The creek ran full and clear, the pastures were beginning to show hints of green, and Cecilia's cattle, no longer mere skin and bones, grazed contentedly in the north field. She was in the kitchen, debating whether to bake bread or pies. Both seemed too domestic, too obviously anticipatory, when the sound of hoofbeats made her heart leap into her throat. One rider, approaching at a steady pace. Cecilia moved to the window, her breath catching at the sight of Adam Pritchett riding toward her house. He was cleaner than when she'd last seen him, his clothes less trail-worn, but it was undeniably him, that straight-backed posture, the confident set of his shoulders. For a moment, she considered waiting inside, pretending she hadn't been watching for him. Then she shook her head at her own foolishness and stepped out onto the porch, shielding her eyes against the morning sun. Adam saw her and raised a hand in greeting, his face breaking into a smile that made Cecilia's heart perform an undignified somersault in her chest. He dismounted with easy grace, securing his horse to the hitching post before approaching the porch. "Miss Davis," he called, removing his hat as he climbed the steps. "You're looking well." "Mr. Pritchett," Cecilia replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Welcome back to Bandera." They stood facing each other, the formality of their greeting at odds with the warmth in their eyes. Adam looked tired from his journey, but somehow more vital than Cecilia remembered, his presence filling the porch in a way that made the world beyond seem distant and unimportant. The rain finally came, he observed, glancing around at the revived landscape. Last week, Cecilia confirmed. 3 days of it. The creek's running high again. Good timing, Adam smiled. Just when the next drives will be coming through? Yes, Cecilia agreed, wondering why they were making such banal conversation when there was so much unsaid between them. As if reading her thoughts, Adam took a step closer, his expression turning serious. Cecilia, he said, her name sounding different in his voice, weighted with meaning. I've thought about you every day since I left, about our conversation, about my promise to return. I remember, Cecilia said softly. I meant what I said, Adam continued, about wanting to court you properly, if you'll allow it. The directness of his statement, the lack of artifice or game playing, was refreshing. Cecilia had spent her life navigating the indirect communications of a father who never said what he truly meant, who buried his feelings beneath criticism and demands. Adam's honesty was like clear water after years of mud. I'd like that, she said, her own honesty matching his. Very much. Adam's smile returned, brighter than before. Then, may I call on you this evening? For supper, perhaps? Yes, Cecilia agreed, then added impulsively. Or you could stay now. I was about to make breakfast. The invitation was forward, perhaps too forward for a proper lady. But Cecilia found she didn't care about propriety. She had spent too long trying to conform to others' expectations. I'd be honored, Adam accepted, his smile turning warm. Though I should warn you, I've been on the trail for weeks. My conversation might not be up to your standards. I think I can manage, Cecilia replied, leading him into the house. The breakfast that followed was simple biscuits, bacon, and coffee, but the conversation flowed easily between them. Adam told her about his journey to Kansas City and back, the challenges and triumphs of the trail. Cecilia shared the developments in Bandera during his absence, Montgomery's attempts at intimidation, and her own growing confidence in standing against him. You've done well, Adam said admiringly. Better than well. You've turned the tide in your favor. I had help, Cecilia acknowledged. Your friend in Austin has been invaluable, and the contract with the Western Cattle Company gave me legitimacy I couldn't have established on my own. You give yourself too little credit, Adam said, leaning forward. The contract and connections might have opened doors, but you're the one who walked through them. You're the one who faced down Montgomery and his cronies day after day. His praise warmed Cecilia in a way her father's never had, perhaps because it was earned rather than bestowed, recognition of her actions rather than her obedience. It's strange, she admitted. All my life, I was told I was too stubborn, too headstrong, too independent. My father saw these as flaws to be corrected, but they're the very qualities that have allowed me to keep this ranch. Your father was wrong about many things, Adam said, his voice gentle but firm. Especially about you. I knew that from the moment I met you. How? Cecilia asked, genuinely curious. How could you know when we'd barely exchanged words? Adam considered the question, his blue eyes thoughtful. I've met all kinds of people on the trail, good and bad, brave and cowardly. You learn to read people quickly when your life might depend on it. He paused, then continued more softly. In you, I saw someone fighting against impossible odds. Not because she was stubborn or foolish, but because she believed in something worth fighting for. That kind of conviction is rare, Cecilia, and valuable beyond measure. The sincerity in his voice made Cecilia's throat tighten with emotion. My father never saw that, she whispered. Some men are blind to the treasures right in front of them, Adam replied, reaching across the table to take her hand. It's their loss, not yours. The touch of his hand on hers sent a current of warmth up Cecilia's arm. For a moment, they sat in silence, connected by that simple contact, each reading in the other's eyes truths too new and fragile to speak aloud. Finally, reluctantly, Adam withdrew his hand and stood. I should go. I've taken enough of your morning, and I have business in town before this evening. Business? Cecilia asked, rising as well. A few matters to settle, Adam said vaguely. Nothing for you to worry about. Something in his tone made Cecilia suspect There was more to it than he was saying, but she didn't press. They had time, now time, to learn each other's secrets, to build trust slowly rather than in the heated rush of crisis. "Until this evening, then," she said, walking him to the door. Adam paused on the threshold, turning back to her. "Cecilia," he said softly, "I want you to know whatever happens between us, whatever you decide about me, nothing changes with the Western Cattle Company contract. That's yours, free and clear, with no strings attached." The assurance touched her deeply, not because she had doubted his integrity, but because it showed his understanding of her need for independence, for security that was truly her own. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing he would understand all that the words encompassed. Adam nodded, placed his hat back on his head, and stepped out into the sunlight. Cecilia watched from the doorway as he mounted his horse and rode away, his figure straight and strong against the Texas sky. The rest of the day passed in a blur of anticipation and practical tasks. Cecilia swept the house, prepared a more elaborate supper than she had made in months, and spent longer than necessary arranging her hair. All the while, her mind was filled with Adam, his smile, his steadfast support, the warmth of his hand on hers. It was foolish, perhaps, to feel this way about a man she barely knew. But there was something about Adam Pritchett that resonated with Cecilia's deepest self, as if in seeing her truly, he had allowed her to see herself more clearly as well. As the afternoon waned, Cecilia heard the sound of multiple horses approaching, not just one, as she had expected, but several. Frowning, she moved to the window, her heart sinking at the sight of Montgomery leading a group of men toward her house, including Sheriff Holloway. "Not today," she muttered, straightening her shoulders and moving to the door. Whatever Montgomery wanted, she would face it head-on, as she had learned to do in the past months. She stepped onto the porch just as Montgomery reined his horse to a stop in her yard. The banker was dressed in his usual finery, a stark contrast to the dust of the ranch yard. "Miss Davis," he called, not bothering to dismount. "I've come to deliver a message." "You could have sent a letter, Mr. Montgomery," Cecilia replied coolly. "It would have saved you the ride." Montgomery's smile was thin and unpleasant. "Some messages are best delivered in person. I've come to inform you that the bank has reconsidered its position on your father's loans. We'll be requiring full payment by the end of the month." The demand was impossible, and Montgomery knew it. Even with the Western Cattle Company contract, Cecilia couldn't raise that kind of money in 2 weeks. "On what grounds?" she demanded, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I've made every payment on time since the new arrangement was established." "Market conditions have changed," Montgomery said smoothly. "The bank's board has decided to call in certain high-risk loans. Yours, unfortunately, falls into that category." It was a transparent lie. Montgomery controlled the bank's board, and this was clearly retaliation for her success in maintaining the ranch despite his efforts. "This is about the Western Cattle Company contract," Cecilia stated flatly. "You're punishing me for finding a way to keep my land." "Business is business, Miss Davis," Montgomery shrugged, his false sympathy more insulting than open hostility. "Nothing personal." "Like hell it isn't," a new voice interjected, and Cecilia's heart leapt as Adam rode into the yard, his expression thunderous as he surveyed the scene. Montgomery's smile vanished. "This is a private matter, Pritchett. It doesn't concern you. When you threaten a business partner of the Western Cattle Company, it very much concerns me," Adam replied, dismounting and moving to stand beside Cecilia on the porch. "Especially when that threat is clearly based on personal vendetta rather than sound financial reasoning." "The bank's decisions are not subject to your approval," Montgomery snapped. "No," Adam agreed, "but they are subject to review by the Banking Commission in Austin. I wonder how they'd view a local bank calling in loans selectively, particularly those belonging to a successful female business owner who happens to be competing with the bank's president for water rights." The implied threat hung in the air. Montgomery's face darkened with anger, but Cecilia could see uncertainty in his eyes. "You think you can intimidate me with vague threats about Austin?" Montgomery demanded, though with less confidence than before. "I have friends in high places too, Pritchett." "I'm sure you do," Adam replied evenly. "Just as I'm sure they'd be very interested in this." He pulled a folded document from his vest pocket. "A sworn statement from the former clerk of the Bandera Bank, detailing how you've been manipulating loan terms to force small ranchers to sell their land at below market values." Cecilia stared at Adam in surprise. This must have been the business he'd mentioned earlier, gathering ammunition against Montgomery. "You're bluffing," Montgomery accused, though he looked considerably less certain than before. "Am I?" Adam challenged. "Would you like to test that theory? I'm sure the territorial newspapers would find it fascinating reading. Bankers' scheme to defraud ranchers exposed. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Montgomery's face had gone pale beneath his sunburn. He looked to Sheriff Holloway, who seemed equally unsettled by this turn of events. "This isn't over, Pritchett," Montgomery warned, gathering his reins. "You won't always be around to protect her." "That's where you're wrong," Adam replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "I plan to be around for a very long time." The implication was clear, and Cecilia felt a surge of emotion at the public declaration of Adam's intentions toward her. Montgomery spat on the ground, a final gesture of defiance before turning his horse. "Come on," he barked to his men. "We're wasting time here." The group rode away in a cloud of dust, leaving Cecilia and Adam standing side by side on the porch. "Where did you get that document?" Cecilia asked once they were alone. Adam's fierce expression softened as he looked at her. "From the former clerk who now works at the Mercantile in San Antonio. I've been gathering evidence against Montgomery for months, ever since I first heard about his tactics from other ranchers along the trail." "Months?" Cecilia repeated, surprised. "Before you even met me? Men like Montgomery are a plague on honest folk," Adam explained. "I've seen too many good ranchers driven off their land by his kind. When I heard about what was happening in Bandera, I started asking questions. So that first day when you came to negotiate water rights, I already knew who you were," Adam admitted, "and what you were facing. I didn't expect—" He paused, his gaze softening further. "I didn't expect you." The admission touched Cecilia deeply. Adam had come to help, not knowing who she was beyond a name and a situation. His feelings for her had developed after, based on who she truly was rather than any preconceived notion. "Is Montgomery really finished?" she asked, still wary of hoping too much. "That seemed almost too easy." "Not finished," Adam cautioned, "but significantly weakened. He knows now that moving against you means exposing himself to scrutiny he can't afford. It changes the calculation for him." "Thank you," Cecilia said, the words inadequate for the depth of her gratitude. "Not just for today, but for everything, for seeing value in me when no one else did." Adam took a step closer, his expression serious. "Cecilia," he said softly, "I didn't create that value. I just recognized what was already there." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she chose, and gently touched her cheek. "Your father told you that you were worthless," he continued, his voice low and intense. "He was wrong about everything, about your strength, your courage, your intelligence, about what makes a woman valuable." Tears pricked at Cecilia's eyes, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming relief of being truly seen and appreciated for exactly who she was. "Adam," she whispered, unable to find words for the emotion swirling within her. Understanding her without words, Adam leaned forward and kissed her, a gentle press of his lips against hers that nonetheless held the promise of passion carefully restrained. Cecilia responded instinctively, her hands coming up to rest on his chest as she leaned into the kiss. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Adam rested his forehead against hers. "I know it's too soon," he murmured. "I know we've barely begun to know each other, but I want you to know that I intend to court you properly, Cecilia Davis. And if you'll have me, someday I intend to ask for more." The declaration should have frightened her. It was bold, presumptuous even. But Cecilia found only joy in his words, a recognition of possibilities she had long since given up on. "I'd like that," she said simply, honestly. "Very much." Adam smiled, the expression transforming his face from handsome to breathtaking. "Then I suppose I should start by taking you to supper, as promised, though I'm afraid I'm not dressed for the occasion." Cecilia laughed, the sound free and light in a way she hadn't felt in years. "I believe I was planning to cook for you, if you recall." "Even better," Adam replied, taking her hand in his as they turned toward the house. "I've been dreaming about home cooking for weeks." As they crossed the threshold together, Cecilia felt a sense of rightness, of coming home in a deeper way than she had ever experienced. The ranch was her legacy, her birthright, but Adam was a choice she was making freely, a future she was claiming for herself. Her father had been wrong about so many things, but most of all, he had been wrong about her worth. In Adam's eyes, in his respect and admiration, Cecilia found confirmation of what she had begun to believe in the months since he'd first ridden away. That she was valuable, not despite her independence and strength, but because of them. Outside, the Texas sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Inside, Cecilia Davis and Adam Pritchett were beginning something that would outlast the sunset, the drought, and all the doubts that had come before. It was, Cecilia thought, as Adam helped her prepare their supper, moving around her kitchen as if he belonged there, the start of a story very different from the one her father had imagined for her. A better story, one she was writing for herself, with a man who saw her true worth and cherished it. And that, she knew with growing certainty, was worth more than all the ranches in Texas. The months that followed were a revelation for Cecilia. Adam courted her with a thoroughness and devotion that transformed her understanding of what love could be. He brought her wildflowers picked from the range, read poetry to her by lamplight, and listened, truly listened, when she spoke of her hopes and fears for the future. Most importantly, he respected her independence, never attempting to take over management of the ranch or make decisions for her. Instead, he offered support and partnership, working alongside her when needed, but always acknowledging that the final choices were hers to make. Montgomery had indeed backed off after their confrontation, though Cecilia harbored no illusions that he had given up entirely. The banker watched from a distance, biding his time, but with Adam's evidence hanging over his head like a sword, he dared not move openly against her. The Western Cattle Company contract proved as valuable as Adam had promised. 3 more drives came through that season, bringing welcome income that allowed Cecilia to make substantial payments on her father's debts. By the fall, the ranch was on firmer financial footing than it had been in years. As winter approached, Adam faced a decision. The Western Cattle Company expected him to lead another drive in the spring, a journey that would take him away from Bandera for months. The thought of such a separation was painful to both of them. "I've been thinking," Adam said one evening as they sat on Cecilia's porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, "about the future, our future." Cecilia's heart quickened at the serious note in his voice. "What about it?" Adam took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle patterns on her palm. "I've been offered a position with the Western Cattle Company, not as a trail boss, but as their representative here in Central Texas, establishing and maintaining relationships with ranchers for water rights and cattle purchases." "Here?" Cecilia repeated, hardly daring to hope. "You'd stay in Bandera?" "If you want me to," Adam replied, his eyes seeking hers. "I'd need to travel occasionally, but no more long drives, no more months away." "Of course I want you to stay," Cecilia said without hesitation. "But Adam, I know how much you love the trail, the freedom of it, the challenge. Are you sure you're ready to give that up?" Adam's smile was tender as he reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "I've spent 15 years on the trail, Cecilia. I've seen the territories from Texas to Montana, driven cattle through blizzards and drought and everything in between. It's been a good life, but a lonely one." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "What I feel for you, what we've built together these past months, means more to me than all the open trails in the world. I'm ready for a different kind of journey now. One we take together." Cecilia's throat tightened with emotion. "I want that too," she whispered, "more than I can say." Adam's gaze held hers for a long moment before he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I had planned to wait until Christmas," he said, a touch of nervousness in his voice that Cecilia found endearing. "But now seems like the right moment." He opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring, a single diamond set in gold. "Cecilia Davis," he said solemnly, "will you marry me? Not because you need my protection or support, you've proven beyond doubt that you can stand on your own, but because I love you and hope that you might love me too, because I believe we could build something remarkable together." Tears sprang to Cecilia's eyes at the perfect rightness of his proposal, acknowledging her independence while offering partnership, speaking of love rather than necessity. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "Yes, I'll marry you, Adam." The joy that transformed his face was a sight Cecilia knew she would carry in her heart forever. Adam slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her close for a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. "I love you," he murmured against her lips, "more than I ever thought possible." "I love you too," Cecilia replied, the words coming easily now that she had allowed herself to fully feel their truth. "And I'm so glad you stopped at my creek that day." Adam laughed softly. "Best business decision I ever made." They were married in the spring of 1877, a small ceremony in the Bandera church, followed by a celebration at the ranch that brought together Adam's trail friends and the townsfolk who had come, gradually to respect Cecilia's determination and success. Even Montgomery attended, his congratulations stiff but civil. The banker had found himself increasingly isolated as Cecilia's star rose in the community, his underhanded tactics exposed and his influence diminished. He would never be a friend, but he had learned to be wary of crossing either Cecilia or Adam openly. The Davis Ranch renamed the Pritchett Ranch after their marriage. At Cecilia's insistence flourished under their joint care. Adam's connections in the cattle industry brought new opportunities, while Cecilia's intimate knowledge of the land and its capabilities ensured they made the most of its resources. They had their challenges, of course. The drought returned in 1879, though not as severely as before. A dispute with a neighboring rancher over boundary lines tested their patience and diplomacy. And their first child, a son, they named William, after Adam's father arrived during one of the worst blizzards in Texas history, forcing Adam to deliver the baby himself while the doctor was stranded in town. But through it all, they faced each challenge together, their partnership growing stronger with each test. Adam never once made Cecilia feel less for her independent spirit or strong opinions. If anything, he valued these qualities more as the years passed, often telling others that his wife's determination was the backbone of their success. By 1885, the Pritchett Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the county. Cecilia and Adam had added a daughter, Elizabeth, to their family, and were expecting a third child in the fall. The creek that had once been their lifeline during drought was now the center of a thriving water rights business, providing reliable income even in difficult years. On the anniversary of Adam's proposal, as they sat on the porch of their expanded home watching William and Elizabeth chase fireflies in the twilight, Cecilia found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "What are you thinking about?" Adam asked, noting her contemplative expression. "My father," Cecilia admitted, "and how wrong he was." Adam took her hand, the gesture as comforting and familiar now as it had been exciting and new in those early days. "About you?" he asked gently. "About everything," Cecilia replied. "About what makes a woman valuable, about what I was capable of, about what kind of man would love me." She turned to look at her husband, still handsome at 40, his face more weathered now, but his blue eyes as warm and steady as ever. "He told me I was worthless because I spoke my mind, because I questioned instead of obeyed. He said no man would ever want a woman like that." Adam's expression softened with understanding. "And yet, here we are." "Here we are," Cecilia agreed, smiling as she placed her hand on her growing belly. "And I wouldn't change a thing, not even the hard parts. They led us here." Adam leaned over to kiss her, a gesture that still made her heart flutter after 8 years of marriage. "Your father couldn't see your worth because he was looking for the wrong things," he said. "He wanted obedience when your strength was in independence, silence when your voice was your power." Cecilia rested her head on his shoulder, watching their children play in the gathering dusk. "I hope we do better with our own children," she murmured. "I want them to know their worth doesn't depend on fitting someone else's expectations." "They will," Adam assured her, his arm tightening around her shoulders, "because they have you to show them what true strength looks like, what it means to stand firm in your own worth, regardless of what the world says." As the last light of day faded from the sky, Cecilia Pritchett looked out over the land she had fought so hard to keep, at the family she and Adam had built together, and felt a profound sense of contentment. The path hadn't been easy, but it had been hers to choose a choice made possible by a man who had looked at her and seen not a burden, not a problem to be solved, but a partner worthy of respect and love. They had built something remarkable together, just as Adam had promised on that long-ago evening. A home, a family, a life rich with purpose and mutual respect. And in that life, Cecilia had found the final refutation of her father's cruel assessment. She was not worthless. She was, in fact, invaluable to her husband, to her children, and most importantly, to herself. As stars appeared one by one in the Texas sky, Cecilia whispered a silent thank you to the young woman. She had been the one who had stood alone against impossible odds, who had refused to give up even when all seemed lost. That courage, that determination, had led her here, to this moment of perfect contentment, and that, Cecilia knew, was worth everything.